Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. It was October, around 3:30 p.m. I remember the exact time because I just checked my phone after getting on the Orange Line at Berry-UQAM station in Montreal. The afternoon rush hadn't started yet, so the car was only half full, maybe 20 people scattered across the plastic seats. I was heading home from my job at a downtown accounting firm, same route I'd taken every day for 3 years. The train rocked gently as we picked up speed through the tunnel. I had my earbuds in, some podcast about true crime that I can't even remember now. The woman across from me was knitting, her needles clicking in a rhythm that somehow cut through my music. A teenager near the front kept glancing at his phone, thumbs flying across the screen. That's when it started. My phone buzzed against my leg. I pulled it out, expecting a text from my girlfriend Lisa about dinner plans. Instead, the screen showed something I'd never seen before. Emergency alert disease outbreak reported in Montreal area. Avoid large gatherings. Seek medical attention if experiencing fever, aggression, or disorientation. Stay indoors when possible. I stared at the message, reading it twice. Disease outbreak in Montreal? The words felt foreign, like they belonged to some disaster movie, not my Tuesday afternoon commute. Around me, other phones were chiming. The soft electronic sounds created a strange symphony in the train car. The woman with the knitting looked up from her needles, frowning at her device. The teenager's eyes widened as he read his screen. "Did you get that?" the woman asked in accented English, looking directly at me. I nodded, holding up my phone. Disease outbreak, what do you think that means? An older man in a business suit leaned forward from his seat. Probably another false alarm. Remember that chemical spill warning last month? Turned out to be nothing. But something in his voice suggested he didn't believe his own words. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his tie. The teenager stood up, gripping the metal pole. "My mom just texted me, says there's something happening at the hospital where she works. People going crazy, attacking staff." A chill crawled up my spine. I opened my messaging app, fingers trembling as I typed to Lisa, "Did you see the emergency alert? Are you okay?" The train began to slow as we approached Champ de Mars station. Through the windows, I could see the platform was unusually crowded. People pressed against each other, some shouting, others talking rapidly into their phones. A transit security guard was trying to maintain order, but even from a distance I could see the stress etched across his face. My phone buzzed again. Lisa. At work still. Crazy stuff happening downtown. Police everywhere. Something about people getting sick and becoming violent. Stay on the train. Don't get off anywhere crowded. The doors slid open with their familiar pneumatic hiss. Instead of the usual orderly boarding, passengers surged forward desperately. A man in a postal uniform pushed past an elderly woman, knocking her purse to the floor. She cried out in French, but he didn't stop. "Close the doors," someone behind me muttered. "Just close them." As if responding to his plea, the train operator's voice crackled over the intercom. "Next station, Place d'Armes. Due to circumstances, this train will continue with limited stops." The businessman laughed bitterly. "Limited stops? They don't even know what's happening." More people had crowded into our car. The air grew thick with anxiety and the smell of sweat. Conversations buzzed in French and English, fragments reaching my ears. "Hospitals overrun. Avoid downtown. My brother said the airport." I tried calling Lisa, but the call went straight to voicemail. The cell towers were probably overloaded. I sent another text, heading home now. Meet you there. The knitting woman had put away her needles. She kept checking her phone, her face growing paler with each message. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "My daughter," she said quietly. "She works at a daycare in Verdun. Says some of the children, they bit their teachers. Bit them bad enough to need ambulances. Children biting teachers. The image sat wrong in my mind. like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. I thought about my nephew, barely 4 years old, all giggles and sticky fingers. The idea of him hurting someone was impossible, unless something was very, very wrong. The train lurched as we picked up speed again, racing through the tunnel toward Place d'Armes. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. In that brief moment of darkness, I saw my own reflection in the window. Eyes wide, face drawn with worry. I hadn't realized I was showing. Another alert came through. This one different. Emergency alert. Multiple incidents of violence reported citywide. Montreal police urge all citizens to remain indoors. Public transportation may experience delays or cancellations. Multiple incidents, the teenager read aloud. Violence. This is getting serious. The businessman was on his phone now, speaking rapid French to someone. His voice rose with each sentence, panic bleeding through despite his attempt to stay composed. He ended the call and slumped in his seat. "My office," he said to no one in particular. "They're sending everyone home. Said there's been attacks near Place Ville-Marie. Attacks." The word hung in the air like smoke. I thought about all the people I knew in the city, all going about their normal Tuesday routines, unaware that something was spreading through Montreal like poison in water. My phone rang. Lisa. "Thank God," I answered immediately. "Are you? Don't come home." Her voice was tight, controlled. "Stay on the metro, get out of the city if you can." "What, Lisa? What's happening?" "I can see the street from my office window. There are people. They're not acting right. They're attacking anyone who gets too close. The police came, but..." Her voice broke. "One of them grabbed an officer and just... Oh God, there's so much blood." The train began to slow again. Through the static of the intercom, the operator's voice came through strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an incident ahead, we'll be holding in the tunnel for a few minutes. Please remain calm." Holding in the tunnel, my stomach dropped. We were trapped between stations, suspended in darkness beneath the city while chaos erupted above us. "Lisa, listen to me," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "Lock your office door. Don't let anyone in. I'm going to find a way to get to you." "No, you can't. The streets aren't safe. There's something wrong with these people. They don't respond to anything. They just want to hurt." The line went dead. I tried calling back immediately, but there was no signal. The phone showed empty bars, as if the entire network had collapsed. Around me, other passengers were having similar problems. Frustrated voices mixed together in a growing chorus of anxiety. The knitting woman was crying now, clutching her phone like a lifeline. The teenager paced in the small space between seats, running his hands through his hair. The businessman stared out the window at the tunnel wall, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass. "How long have we been stopped?" someone asked. I checked my phone. 4:47 p.m. We'd been sitting still for almost 20 minutes. The lights flickered again, this time staying dim for several seconds before brightening. In that moment of uncertainty, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A distant rumbling like thunder, but wrong somehow. Too rhythmic, too mechanical. "What was that?" the teenager asked. Before anyone could answer, the sound came again, closer now, and with it, a vibration that ran through the floor of the train car. Another train, coming fast, too fast. The businessman stood up, pressing his face against the window. "There's something..." The impact came like the end of the world. Metal screamed against metal in a symphony of destruction. The lights went out completely as our train car twisted and bucked like a living thing in pain. I was thrown from my seat, my body slamming into the ceiling, then the floor, then the opposite wall. The sound was beyond description, not just the collision but the aftermath. Glass shattering in crystalline waterfalls, metal tearing like paper, the hiss of escaping air and the groan of settling wreckage. Then, for a moment, silence. I came to with the taste of copper in my mouth and a ringing in my ears that seemed to come from inside my skull. The air was thick with dust and smoke, making each breath a struggle. Emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow. I was lying on what used to be the ceiling of the train car. Everything was upside down, or maybe I was. My left shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, and something warm trickled down my forehead. "Hello?" I called out, my voice hoarse and strange. "Anyone else?" A groan came from somewhere to my left. I turned my head, sending daggers of pain down my neck, and saw movement in the shadows. Someone was trapped under a section of collapsed seating. "Help!" a weak voice called. "Please!" I forced myself to move, crawling over debris toward the sound. My hands came away sticky from broken glass and things I didn't want to identify. The acrid smell of electrical fires mixed with something else, something organic and wrong. The person trapped was the teenager from before. His leg was pinned under a twisted piece of metal, and his face was pale with shock and pain. "I can't feel my foot," he said, looking up at me with wide eyes. "I can't feel anything below my knee." "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I examined the wreckage around his leg. "Zach," he gasped. "Zach Allen. This is bad, isn't it?" I didn't answer immediately. The metal had crushed his leg at an angle that made my stomach turn. Even if I could free him, even if we could get medical help. "We're going to get you out," I lied. "Just hold on." A sound from the other end of the car caught my attention. Another survivor was stirring, the woman who'd been knitting. She sat up slowly, blood streaming from a cut on her scalp, her gray hair matted and disheveled. "Marie," she said, as if introducing herself. "Marie Dubois. Where are we?" I looked around at the devastation. Our car had folded almost in half, the front and rear sections crumpled like accordion bellows. Through gaps in the twisted metal, I could see the wreckage of the other train, the one that had hit us. Emergency lights flickered sporadically, creating a strobe effect that made everything feel unreal. "Underground," I said. "We're still in the tunnel." Marie tried to stand but immediately sat back down, clutching her ribs. "The others?" I didn't see anyone else moving. In the red emergency lighting, I could make out shapes that had once been people, but my mind refused to process the details. The businessman who'd been worried about false alarms, the postal worker who'd pushed past the elderly woman, all the other passengers who'd just been trying to get home. Zach groaned, bringing my attention back to him. "My phone," he said weakly. "Can you check my phone?" I found his device a few feet away, the screen spider-webbed with cracks but still functional. Somehow it had a weak signal. One bar, flickering. Messages were coming through in fragments. "Mom, can't reach you. Something terrible happening. Don't come home. Tom, downtown is lost. They're everywhere. Get out of the city. Sister, bit dad. He's not dad anymore." I read them to myself, each message confirming what I'd feared. Whatever had started as a disease outbreak had become something much worse, and we were trapped beneath it all, broken and bleeding in a metal tomb. "What do they say?" Zach asked. I looked at his young face, at the hope still flickering in his eyes despite the pain. How do you tell someone that the world they knew ended while they were unconscious? "There's definitely something happening up there," I said carefully. "Some kind of emergency." Marie had crawled closer, moving carefully around the debris. "My phone is dead," she said. "Can you try calling for help?" I dialed 911. The call went through, but instead of an operator, I got a recorded message. "All emergency lines are currently busy. If this is a medical emergency, seek immediate shelter and avoid contact with affected individuals. This is not a test." Affected individuals. The phrase sent ice through my veins. "No one's coming," I said quietly. The three of us sat in the wreckage, the weight of that realization settling over us like a burial shroud. Above us, Montreal was falling apart. Below us, we were trapped with a teenager whose leg was crushed beyond repair, and an older woman who might have internal injuries. And somewhere in the darkness of the tunnel, I could hear new sounds. Distant at first, but growing closer, footsteps, multiple sets of them, moving through the wreckage of the other train. But they weren't walking like rescue workers or emergency responders. They shuffled, dragged, moved with an inconsistent rhythm that made my skin crawl. "Do you hear that?" Marie whispered. I nodded, putting my finger to my lips. We all held our breath, listening to the approaching sounds. Through the gaps in our twisted car, I caught glimpses of movement in the other wreckage, shapes emerging from the shadows, moving toward us with purposeful intent. Zach tried to sit up straighter, wincing with pain. "Maybe it's help," he said hopefully. One of the shapes passed by a functioning emergency light, and I got a clear look at it for just a moment. It had been a person once, still wore the uniform of a metro operator. But something was terribly wrong with the way it moved, the way its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and its eyes. Even from a distance, even in the dim light, I could see its eyes. They reflected the emergency lighting like an animal's, but there was something behind them that was neither human nor animal. Something hungry. It hadn't seen us yet, but it was moving in our direction, drawn by some instinct I didn't understand. I reached over and covered Zach's mouth with my hand, looking directly into his eyes. He saw something in my expression that made him stop trying to speak, stop moving entirely. The thing that had been a metro operator was almost at our car now. I could hear its breathing, a wet, rattling sound that spoke of damaged lungs or worse. It paused just outside the gap where our car had been torn open, as if sensing something. Then it turned and looked directly at us. Its face was a ruin of dried blood and torn flesh, but it was still recognizably human enough to make the sight infinitely worse than if it had been completely monster. One eye was gone, leaving a dark socket, the other fixed on us with an intensity that made my bladder clench. It opened its mouth and made a sound. Not quite a moan, not quite a sigh, but something that carried hunger and need and endless, mindless wanting. Then it started climbing through the wreckage toward us. That's when I knew for certain that whatever was happening above ground had found its way into our underground tomb, and we had nowhere left to run. The infected metro operator dragged itself through the twisted metal toward us, its remaining eye locked on our position. The stench of decay mixed with something metallic filled the air. Its movements were deliberate, but clumsy. I pressed my hand harder against Zach's mouth. Marie had gone completely still beside us, her knitting needles clutched in white-knuckled fists. The creature pulled itself through the gap, its torn uniform revealing mottled gray flesh. Deep bite marks covered its neck and shoulders, the edges festering. Dark fluid leaked from where its missing eye should have been. It was 6 feet away now. Close enough to see its remaining eye had clouded over completely. I grabbed a piece of twisted metal railing, sharp on one end, about the length of a baseball bat. The movement caught the creature's attention, and its head snapped toward me with an audible crack of vertebrae. I swung hard. The impact sent vibrations up my arms. The creature's skull caved in with a wet crack. Dark blood sprayed across the emergency lighting, and it collapsed into the debris. "Is it dead?" Zach whispered. I prodded the body with the metal bar. No response. Whatever had been animating this person had stopped. "We need to move," I said quietly. "If there's one, there might be more." A distant sound made us freeze. Organized footsteps echoing through the tunnel. Not the shuffling gait of the infected, but human movement. "Hello?" a voice called out. "Anyone alive in there?" "Here!" I shouted back. "3 survivors!" Relief flooded through me. Rescue workers, emergency responders. But as the footsteps approached, I heard automatic weapons being readied. Military-grade equipment. "Stand back from the entry point," a commanding voice ordered. "We're coming in armed." 3 figures in full combat gear appeared at the gap. Night vision goggles covered their eyes. Canadian Armed Forces insignia on their uniforms. "Sergeant Collins," the lead soldier identified himself. "We're evacuating survivors from the tunnel system. Anyone bitten?" "No bites. We were in the crash. There was one of those things, but I killed it." The sergeant's weapon stayed trained on us. "Which one of you engaged the infected?" "I did. With this." I held up the bloody metal bar. "Drop the weapon and move to the far end of the car. All of you." Something in his tone alarmed me. This wasn't a rescue. "My friends are injured," I said. "The kid's leg is crushed and she might have internal bleeding." Medical attention is not available, Collins replied flatly. The hospitals are overrun. We're conducting containment operations only. Containment, not rescue, containment. One of the other soldiers stepped forward. Sarge, these people are clearly uninfected. Can't we? Private Miguel, Collins cut him off sharply. You have your orders. I didn't like where this was heading. What kind of containment operations? Before Collins could answer, gunfire erupted from deeper in the tunnel. Multiple shooters, the echo bouncing off concrete walls. Contact, someone shouted over the radio. Multiple infected approaching from Sector 7. Collins pressed his earpiece. This is Alpha Team. We're moving to assist. He looked back at us. Change of plans. Stay exactly where you are. Don't move. Don't follow us. If we don't come back in 1 hour, find another way out. The soldiers vanished into the darkness, leaving us alone with the distant sound of combat growing closer. They were going to kill us, Marie said quietly. I nodded grimly. Probably, but right now we have bigger problems. The gunfire was getting louder, and with it came new sounds. The wet moaning of multiple infected, moving as a group, a pack, a horde. We need to move now, I said, while they're distracted. I can't walk, Zach said, looking down at his mangled leg. Then I'll carry you. It took precious minutes to extract him from the wreckage. His screams of pain as I moved the metal pinning his leg made my teeth ache, but there was no choice. Marie managed to stand, leaning heavily on a piece of debris as a makeshift crutch. I hoisted Zach over my shoulder in a fireman's carry. He was heavier than he looked, and my injured shoulder protested immediately. But adrenaline and desperation gave me strength I didn't know I had. We made our way out of the wrecked car into the tunnel proper. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, creating writhing shadows. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, walls slick with condensation. Old advertisements stared down from grimy posters, their smiling faces now seeming grotesque. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. Behind us, movement sounds were growing stronger, more infected emerging from the wreckage. How far to the next station? I asked. Marie studied the tunnel walls for distance markers. Maybe 1/2 kilometer, she said breathlessly. But I don't know if I can make it. Her condition was deteriorating. Each step sent visible pain across her face, and she left a thin trail of blood droplets on the concrete. Zach had regained consciousness but was delirious from pain and shock. He kept mumbling about missing his sister's birthday party, asking when the train would start moving again. We passed electrical equipment sparking intermittently, casting brief blue flashes. In one flash, I saw bloody handprints along the wall at chest height, as if someone had dragged themselves along using the wall for support. The prints were still wet. Someone else came this way, I whispered. Recently. After 20 minutes, we reached a junction where a service tunnel branched off. A sign indicated emergency access to surface level, but it was written in French. What does it say? I asked Marie. Emergency access to surface level, but it says the exit is sealed during normal operations. A sound from the main tunnel made the decision, the shuffle drag of infected feet. Whatever was following us had caught up. We turned into the service tunnel. This passage was narrower, lined with pipes and electrical conduits. The walls continued the bloody handprint trail. The service tunnel sloped upward. Marie stumbled, catching herself against the wall. When she pulled her hand away, it was covered in blood, not hers, but from the handprints continuing along this tunnel. There, she pointed ahead. A heavy door marked Sortie d'urgence blocked the end. Emergency exit. It stood slightly ajar. Fresh air drifting through the gap. Someone had opened it from the inside. I pushed the door open, revealing concrete stairs leading to street level. Daylight streamed down along with the smell of smoke and something organic. The bloody handprints continued up the stairs with drag marks. Someone had hauled themselves up these steps. Halfway up, we found the source. A Metro security guard lay on the concrete landing, uniform torn and bloody. His eyes opened as we approached. Still human, still aware, but filled with unbearable pain. "Don't come closer," he whispered in accented English. His arm was mangled from bite marks, dark veins radiating from the wounds toward his shoulder. I opened the door, he continued weakly. Thought I could make it out, but it's too late for me now. Marie knelt beside him. How long ago were you bitten? He checked his watch. 20 minutes, maybe 30. Time moves differently when you're dying. This was a real person slowly losing his humanity to a disease we didn't understand. The surface, I asked. What's it like up there? His laugh was bitter. Hell. Complete hell. The military is trying to contain it, but they're failing. And these things are everywhere now. Movement from the tunnel below. The infected had found our trail. You need to go, the guard said. Now. He held up his sidearm. I'll handle it. When you get to the surface, don't trust anyone. The military isn't trying to save people anymore. They're trying to stop the spread. That means killing anyone who might be infected. The sounds from below were getting closer. Go, he insisted. We reached the surface exit just as a gunshot echoed up from below. The guard had kept his promise. The exit opened onto a side street in what I recognized as the Plateau neighborhood. But the Montreal I knew was gone, replaced by something from a nightmare. Cars were abandoned in the middle of the street, their doors hanging open as if their occupants had fled suddenly. Store windows were smashed, their contents scattered across the sidewalks, and bodies lay everywhere, some motionless, others twitching with residual movement. In the distance, I could see smoke rising from multiple fires across the city. Military helicopters circled overhead, and the sound of automatic weapons fire carried on the wind. But it was the movement that caught my attention. Figures shambling between the abandoned cars, moving with that distinctive gait I was learning to recognize. The infected weren't confined to the underground anymore. They had taken the surface too. Marie collapsed beside me as soon as we reached street level. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, and when she tried to speak, only blood came out. Marie, I said, kneeling beside her while still holding Zach. Stay with me. She shook her head weakly and pressed something into my hand. Her knitting needles, the ones she'd used as weapons in the tunnel. For protection, she whispered. Take care of the boy. Her eyes closed, and her breathing stopped. Just like that, she was gone. Not from the infection, but from the injuries she'd sustained in the crash. Internal bleeding, probably made worse by our desperate journey through the tunnels. I was alone now with an unconscious teenager, in a city full of monsters, with no idea where safety might be found. The gunfire was getting closer, and with it came new sounds. The echo of multiple infected moving as a group. A pack, a horde. We need to move now, I said to Zach, though he couldn't hear me. While they're distracted, it took precious minutes to extract him from the wreckage. His screams of pain as I moved the metal pinning his leg made my teeth ache, but there was no choice. Marie managed to stand leaning heavily on a piece of debris as a makeshift crutch. I hoisted Zach over my shoulder in a fireman's carry. He was heavier than he looked, and my injured shoulder protested immediately. But adrenaline and desperation gave me strength I didn't know I had. We made our way out of the wrecked car and into the tunnel proper. The air was thick with dust and smoke from electrical fires. Emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow, creating shadows that moved and writhed like living things. The gunfire was coming from ahead of us, where the tunnel curved toward what I hoped was the next station. Behind us, I could hear new sounds. More infected emerging from the wreckage, drawn by our movement. This way, I said, choosing direction based purely on hope. We moved as quickly as we could manage. Marie's breathing was labored, and she kept one hand pressed against her ribs. Zach drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling deliriously about his family. The tunnel stretched endlessly ahead. My legs burned from Zach's weight, and sweat poured down my face despite the cool underground air. Every few steps I had to stop and adjust his position, each pause bringing the sounds behind us closer. There, Marie gasped, pointing ahead. Light! She was right. Beyond the curve, artificial light spilled into the tunnel. Not the red emergency lighting, but the harsh white glare of floodlights. The next station. As we approached, the sounds of combat became clearer. Soldiers shouting orders, the staccato burst of automatic weapons, and underneath it all, the continuous moan of infected voices raised in inhuman chorus. We reached the edge of the platform just as hell broke loose above us. The metro station had become a war zone. Floodlights mounted on military vehicles illuminated a scene from a nightmare. Dozens of infected poured down the entrance stairs, moving with that distinctive lurching gait. Some wore business suits, others casual clothes. A few still clutched the belongings they'd carried when the infection took them. Canadian Armed Forces soldiers had established a defensive perimeter, using overturned metro benches and advertising displays. They fired controlled bursts into the advancing crowd, aiming for headshots. Bodies dropped, but more kept coming. "Fall back to position 2, someone screamed over the radio. "We're being overrun." A soldier near the platform's edge noticed us climbing up from the tunnel. "Civilians on the tracks," he shouted. "Get them to cover." But there was no cover. The infected had broken through the defensive line on the east side of the station. Soldiers were retreating, laying down suppressing fire as they pulled back toward the exit. I saw Private Miguel from the tunnel team dragging a wounded comrade toward the stairs when an infected woman in a nurse's uniform latched onto his arm. Her teeth sank through the uniform fabric. Miguel screamed and put his sidearm against her head. Pulling the trigger, brain matter painted the station wall, but it was too late. The bite was deep, blood flowing down his arm. "I'm hit," he shouted to Sergeant Collins. "I'm infected." Collins didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and put 2 rounds in Miguel's chest. The young soldier dropped beside the woman he'd just killed. "No hesitation," Collins shouted to his remaining men. "Anyone gets bit, they're done, no exceptions." That's when I realized this wasn't just a battle against the infected. It was survival where a single scratch meant execution by your own side. An infected man in a metro uniform, different from the one I'd killed in the tunnel, charged toward our position. Half his face was missing, torn away to reveal bloody bone and sinew. He moved with mechanical determination, oblivious to the damage. I still had the metal bar from the train wreck. I swung it like a club, connecting with the creature's temple. The impact sent it sprawling, but it immediately began trying to get back up. "The head," a soldier shouted. "You have to destroy the brain." I brought the bar down repeatedly until the infected man stopped moving. Dark fluid pooled around what remained of his skull. "Move it!" Collins was waving us toward the exit stairs. "This position is lost." I hefted Zach higher on my shoulder and ran. Marie hobbled beside me, using her knitting needle like a weapon to fend off an infected teenager who got too close. She drove the metal point through his eye socket, and he dropped instantly. The stairs were a bottleneck of terror. Infected pressed in from above while soldiers and civilians tried to evacuate from below. Bodies piled up on the steps, creating obstacles that slowed everyone down. A massive explosion somewhere above shook dust from the ceiling. "They're bombing the entrances," someone screamed, "sealing us in." But that couldn't be right. They wouldn't seal in their own soldiers. Unless the situation was so bad that acceptable losses included anyone unlucky enough to be underground when the decision was made. We reached the halfway point on the stairs when the infected broke through the military line below us. They poured up the steps like a gray tide, overwhelming the few soldiers who'd stayed behind to cover the retreat. Collins appeared beside us, his uniform torn and bloody. "Give me the kid," he said, reaching for Zach. "Why?" I asked, not releasing my grip. "Because you can't carry him and fight at the same time, and we're about to do a lot of fighting." He was right. I transferred Zach to the sergeant's back, noting how the soldier handled him with surprising gentleness despite the chaos around us. We fought our way up the remaining stairs, past infected and debris and the bodies of people who'd almost made it out. Marie stayed close behind me, her breathing becoming more labored with each step. The station's main entrance was blocked by a military barricade. Soldiers were shooting through gaps in the defenses, trying to hold back the infected masses that pressed against the barriers. "Secondary exit," Collins shouted over the gunfire. "Service tunnel on the north side." We changed direction, pushing through a crowd of panicked civilians toward a maintenance door. An infected man in a business suit grabbed Marie's arm. She drove her knitting needle through his throat, but he didn't release his grip. I swung my metal bar, taking his head clean off. The body finally let go and collapsed. Marie was pale now, her lips taking on a blue tinge. The exertion was killing her, but she kept moving. The service tunnel was narrow and dark, lit only by flashlights. We joined a stream of survivors and soldiers making their way toward what we hoped was safety. Behind us, the sounds of combat faded into an ominous silence. "They're through the barricade," someone whispered. Collins checked his ammunition. "How many rounds do you have left?" The soldiers around us called out numbers. "Never enough." They were almost out of ammunition, and we still didn't know how far we had to go. The tunnel began to slope upward. Fresh air drifted down from ahead, street air, carrying the scents of autumn and smoke. We were almost to the surface. That's when the tunnel behind us erupted in screams. The infected had found the service entrance. They poured into the narrow space, their moans bouncing off the concrete walls in a horrific echo. In the confined space, there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. "Form a line," Collins ordered. "Controlled fire, make every shot count." The soldiers knelt in the tunnel, creating a wall of gunfire. Muzzle flashes strobed in the darkness as they poured rounds into the advancing horde. Bodies dropped, but the sheer mass of infected pressed forward over their own dead. "I'm out," one soldier called. "Me too," said another. Collins was on his last magazine. He looked at Zach, still unconscious on his back, then at Marie, who was barely standing. "You need to run," he said to me. "Get to the surface, don't look back." "What about you?" He smiled grimly and pulled a grenade from his belt. "I'll buy you some time." I wanted to argue, to find another way, but the infected were only yards away now, moving with purpose, reaching with grasping hands and snapping teeth. I grabbed Marie's arm and ran toward the growing circle of daylight ahead. Behind us, Collins was shouting orders to his remaining men, preparing for a final stand in a tunnel beneath Montreal. We reached the surface just as the explosion shook the ground beneath our feet. The tunnel entrance collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris, sealing the infected underground, and sealing Collins and his men with them. But I barely had time to process their sacrifice, because as I emerged onto the street level, I saw what Montreal had become. The city was dying, cars burned in the streets, sending pillars of black smoke into the afternoon sky. Bodies lay scattered on the sidewalks, some still moving weakly, others completely still. Store windows were smashed, their contents spilled across the pavement like scattered organs. In the distance, I could see military helicopters circling the downtown core. Occasionally, missiles streaked from their weapon systems, striking buildings that erupted in flowers of flame and debris. They weren't trying to save the city anymore. They were destroying it to stop the spread. Marie collapsed beside me, her face gray with pain and exhaustion. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't go any further." I knelt beside her, still clutching my makeshift weapon. "We're out, we made it out." She smiled weakly, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. "No," she said, looking at the chaos around us. "We're not out. We're just in a bigger trap now." Her breathing became more labored, each breath a struggle. "Take care of him," she whispered, nodding toward Zach. "He's just a kid." "Marie, stay with me," I said, but her eyes were already losing focus. "Tell my daughter," she started, then stopped. Her hand went limp in mine. Marie Dubois was gone, the woman who had tried to maintain normalcy by knitting on a train, who had fought infected with her needles, who had survived a train crash and a journey through hell. She died on a street corner in Montreal, victim of injuries sustained in what seemed like a lifetime ago. As if to prove her final words right, an infected man in a postal uniform stumbled around the corner. His mailbag still hung from his shoulder, but his face was a ruin of torn flesh and exposed bone. He saw us and began moving in our direction with mechanical determination. I was alone now with an unconscious teenager and a woman's body, facing a city full of these creatures. I closed Marie's eyes gently, took her knitting needles as she would have wanted, and prepared to continue the fight for survival. Zach was still unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. and I was one man with a piece of metal and 2 knitting needles, facing a city full of monsters that had once been human. But we'd survived the train wreck. We'd survived the tunnels. We'd survived the soldiers and their containment protocols. Marie hadn't made it to see whatever came next, but her sacrifice meant something. Somehow, I'd keep surviving. For Zach, for Marie's memory, for everyone who didn't make it out of that underground hell, even if the Montreal we'd known was gone forever, even if the world above ground had become just another kind of tunnel, filled with different kinds of darkness. I shouldered Zach again, whispered a goodbye to Marie, and started walking toward what I hoped might be safety, knowing that in this new world, safety was just the space between one nightmare and the next. The city burned around us, and I walked into its dying light, carrying my wounded companion and the weight of the dead, toward an uncertain dawn that might never come.